All right. Once again, welcome everyone to today's Lunch and Learn webinar, the ChargeLogic Payments 3-Point Annual Checkup, brought to you by ArcherPoint. There are some important questions about ChargeLogic that you might be asking yourself. Am I getting the best rates with my ChargeLogic payment system? Am I protected against fraud? Are my authorizations being processed efficiently? If your answers aren't a resounding yes, then it may be time to schedule an annual ChargeLogic Payments Checkup. Our presenter today is Crystal Tollison, a 20-year Dynamics NAV veteran with an impressive track record of successful implementations and support for clients in multiple industries across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. She has expertise in multiple versions of NAV and within all core modules, and she's been implementing and helping our clients properly set up ChargeLogic for over 6 years. She was also the first to successfully complete the ChargeLogic certification program and continues her ChargeLogic training on an ongoing basis. In just 30 minutes today, Crystal will discuss the importance of getting an annual checkup, including the benefits of evaluating and adjusting your settings to ensure they are optimized to help you increase productivity, reduce fraud, automate processes, and get the lowest credit card fees possible. We will offer Q&A at the end of the presentation, so please, as we go along, go ahead and type your questions in the questions pane of your GoToWebinar console, or you can use the raise your hand option during the Q&A to ask your question verbally. We'll announce the person asking the question and unmute your line at that time. So without any further delay, Crystal, over to you.
Thanks, Suzanne, and hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As Suzanne said, I'm Crystal, and I think I know a few of you on the line, so glad to see you join us. So today we're here to discuss the value of an annual ChargeLogic checkup and what's involved when you have one. I developed this review after many customers finding that they did not fully understand the potential of their credit card software or understand how it was currently working in their system. Sometimes this is due to personnel turnover, or sometimes your business needs or business models evolve after you implement the system and you need to reevaluate your setups as they no longer fit your needs. With these reasons and others in mind, I developed a review checklist of your system that will leave you with a better understanding of your credit card functionality and help determine if any changes are needed. So how do you know if you need one? Well, do you understand your ChargeLogic payment setups and how they work to save you money on downgrades? Do you know how to use the fraud protection setups? Do the automated processes fit into your workflow and save your users processing time? So if you cannot answer these questions, you may benefit from an annual checkup. This includes a review of your settings to ensure that they are properly adjusted to meet your business's needs. Optimized settings can provide you with the ability to protect your processing rates, provide maximum security, and automate processes. So during the checkup, we'll educate you on ChargeLogic's functionality and make sure your system is utilizing what your software offers to meet today's electronic payment challenges. At the end of the checkup session, you'll be provided with a document of what we discussed for you to implement or to keep for future references. Let's look deeper into these questions now. First off, the question everyone wants to know is how to get the best rates. Starting with negotiating your lowest rate and lowest fees with your gateway or processor. These costs can be structured various ways. For example, your account may be called a tiered account, a bucketed account, or an interchange plus account, but these all have a tiered rate system. These tiers are where your rates are set. When negotiating, ask them to consider your company's business model. So if it's a B2B versus a B2C, you need to let them know. A B2B organization will usually be accepting transactions from established and vetted customer base with which you have an ongoing relationship. That should be a much lower risk than accepting transactions from the general public, such as a retail establishment or B2C businesses. Yeah. After negotiating your rates, protect them by avoiding downgrades if at all possible, and we'll discuss more about that. And finally, be sure to process transactions in a timely manner. This means the authorization is settled as soon as possible and the settlement batch is submitted each evening. So what exactly is a downgrade? The category tiers for your transactions are qualified, mid-qualified, and non-qualified, with increasing fees per each tier. Each has its own stated rate, as in the example shown here. Anything that causes your transaction to move from your qualified tier to another tier is called a downgrade. These rates are negotiated by you when you sign your agreement with your gateway or processor. The processor will grade your transactions and place them on one of these three categories based on several different factors, and we'll discuss those next. In addition, make sure your account has been assigned the correct industry type. Your industry type is important because it establishes a risk level and determines in part what causes downgrades for that account. For example, a restaurant will have a very different type of account from an e-commerce type of account. A direct marketing account is usually the industry type for our clients when processing an order in NAV, but it also could be a retail type for our customers on the LS retail product. So now we've got a poll. We'd like to know, have you had a review of your account analysis to determine what is causing the downgrades?
All right, everybody, the poll has been launched. If you can please just take a moment to click your screen, either yes or no.
So, and then, okay.
Go ahead, Crystal.
All right, and the analysis is going to reveal what issues are causing your transactions to be downgraded. So this is a very important piece of information. And you can get the analysis from your gateway or your processor.
All right, and our poll response is that 75% of our audience has not. The other 25% that responded has.
Those are probably the people I implemented and told them to do that. So very important, and that is when I implement one of the things that I try to get a user to do. So what causes a downgrade? Well, there's many reasons. Here's just a few, and these are the main ones for the orders we see passing through now. Not setting the settlement batch at the end of the day. This happens when maybe your person responsible for that task leaves before everyone is through processing orders for the day, so they leave the batch open and they submit it in the morning. And this could be causing you a downgrade. Not settling the authorization within 24 to 48 hours. That's a range because that time frame is set by your individual gateway or processor. Again, very common in NAV. If you take the order on Monday and you don't ship until Wednesday, that could be causing a downgrade. You have a billing address mismatch. Another one is using non-standard cards. This is your customer is using cashback cards or business cards or other types of cards. They charge you more to process those. Your authorization and your settlement are not for the same amount. And again, this is very common for our users in NAV, where you take the order and authorize the $100 for the item. As it processes through the system, you end up adding $15 for freight, and now you actually settle for $115. Very common. Not sending the level 2 and level 3 information if your customer has a purchase card. And we'll talk more about that. And these are just some of them. The most beneficial thing you can do in your effort to reduce your downgrades is to determine what's causing them. So get that analysis and see what that is. Sometimes this information is included, at least in part, on your monthly billing statements, or you may need to ask your processor for that. So let's look at some of the things we can do to keep these at a minimum. So use the settlement options. This is some setup found on your store card that can help control several processes. The most important is what action to take if your authorization does not match your settlement, and just like we discussed. This setup can keep a transaction from being downgraded when this situation occurs. You can buy the purchase granule if needed. So a purchase card, these are typically a type of card that used to be issued by governmental agencies such as schools, police, and municipalities. But we're finding more private industries are seeing a benefit from using them and issuing them as well. So that used to be a guideline, and it is not so much anymore. You need to really look at that analysis. When your customer uses a purchase card, you're required to send extra information with that transaction. If it's not sent, that transaction is downgraded. So level 2 information comes from the sales order header and includes things like your PO number. Level 3 information comes from the order lines and can include such things as freight. And this is the additional information they're looking for, some of it. Your account analysis can identify if your customer base is frequently using these types of cards. If it comes through occasionally, twice a year, maybe not a big deal, maybe not worth getting the purchase granule, which is separate. But if these come in every month, you definitely would want to look into that. And that, like I said, is a separate granule from ChargeLogic. So it's important to submit your batch each day, as I said earlier. If daily submitting of your settlement batch is an issue, we can set up your NAS or your Navision application server to automatically close and submit your settlement for you. We could do this for in the day, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, when you're sure everybody's done for the day. This functionality is not included in base ChargeLogic, but it is part of the base nav functionality. So we can have ArcherPoint set that up for you for usually within 1 or 2 hours. Queued transactions can be scheduled for submitting at a later date. This keeps the authorization transaction from aging, which will cause a downgrade at some point, or from expiring, which may result in an authorization abuse fee. These fees are charged when you never settle nor cancel an authorization. You may find that the time needed to manage the queued transactions pays off in the long term by the cost savings on your downgrades. And so we can discuss other timing issues and solutions during your review. So how does a downgrade affect me? Well, on average, more than 50% of a merchant's transactions experience a downgrade. And that 50% is actually one of the lowest rates I've ever seen. In reading various credit card articles, they always give a percentage on this that's higher than this 50%. I happened to pick this one up from an article and thought it would be the best one I'd seen so far, so I used it. Downgrades generally add 1 to 3% per transaction on top of your qualified rate. For example, if your qualified rate is 1.59, your mid-qualified rate is 2.49, that transaction will be 4.08% will be your fee. So now, for a $1,000 transaction, your fee is $40.80 compared to $15.90 had it been a qualified transaction. So that's $25 difference right there. So we have another poll here real quick. And I'm just curious as to how many people on the call today are importing orders from their website. And this is going to come up in our fraud discussion.
All right, everybody, the poll is live. If you would please select yes or no. Do you import orders from your website into NAV? All right, thank you for your responses. As it stands right now, 67% do not, and 33% of our audience today does.
Does, okay. All right, so first off, your processor or gateway will impose their own fraud prevention steps on your transactions. You will need to check with them to know exactly what steps they're taking and exactly what setups they have for your specific account, because these can vary by account type and by processor. For example, they may return a message to your company that they could not verify the address, but they may approve the transaction regardless. But for another account that is maybe an e-commerce type, they may decline a transaction with an address mismatch. So that's where the question about web orders comes into play. They may have different rules for them. You should also consider that your customer's card issuer may also have fraud checks in place. For example, it's common to have a limit to the number of transactions coming from the same place within a certain time frame. In this instance, you may have no problem with the approval for the first 3 transactions you do for a customer in a row, but then that 4th one and any one you try after that comes back declined, and that is probably because of the frequency check they're performing at that customer's card. Again, a very common thing in NAV, if you've got a customer who has locations in 5 places, they do a separate order for each location and try to charge them to the same card. So your ChargeLogic fraud protection setups come in to play after the transaction is returned from the processor as approved. And so we can look at some of those setups. That's an important point, that is after your transaction is approved from your processor. So most fraud protection is aimed at B2C type of transactions, which are often web orders. So I was just coming wanting to get a feel for what the audience has. In NAV, after the authorization has been sent to your processor and returned with that approved status, the transaction will pass through then the ChargeLogic fraud setups. These setups are most useful for web transactions or B2C, where you're dealing with the general public versus dealing with vetted customers where there's usually not a fraud issue. With these setups, you have several responses to choose from. You can simply have a send the user a warning message and then rely on the user to take the appropriate next steps. Or you can have the setups put the transaction on hold, preventing the user from continuing until the issue is resolved. Or you can have the setups automatically reverse the approved authorization and cancel the hold on funds. So some of the situations it will alert your user to if there's address verification issues, and you'll see that almost on every foreign address for some gateways, because some gateways do not verify foreign addresses. CVV issues, bill to and ship to are different, which may be important to you if you have web orders coming in. The frequency of transactions based on the bill to address, the sell to address, or the NAV customer number. Again, that may not be a problem for you, but it may be something you want to know. And then they have a setup where you can set a ceiling amount or a amount floor, so that if the transaction comes through above that amount or below that amount, you get alerted. And this is actually one of the fraud setups that apply to any NAV user, any type of user, because your credit card has established a cap on your single transaction amount. Now that amount may be $100,000 and your company never hits it, but I have several customers where they do on a regular basis hit that $100,000 mark. They get a warning. They know that it's going to be declined if they send it through, and so they split the transaction based on that warning. They go back and split that transaction into multiple transactions to get it approved. So the last point in your review will be to discuss if automating your credit card transactions fits into your company's workflow. So you can automatically trigger the authorization step when you release or when you ship if your company follows this profile. Your customers tend to use the same credit card for all of their orders. Your invoicing is straightforward without variations or exceptions. All orders follow the same workflows from authorization through settlements. And some of you may already be using the auto-authorize process, which can save time for the user. If the system is set up properly and the order created correctly, they only need to carry out the release or ship step, and the system does the rest. But there's several setups that work together for this automated workflow. First, you have to select a default credit card from the customer's credit card list. Then you have to select the auto-authorize in the EFT setup for either release or ship. And finally, you need to set up a payment method code that indicates that the EFT tab on your sales order will be used to automatically create this authorization. So when will this not work well for you? Sounds great to have it automatically working. However, there are situations where this is not a good fit. For example, if your customer wants to spread payment across multiple credit cards to pay an invoice, this process will not work. And I do have clients where that is a fairly frequent occurrence. If they use different credit cards based on which department or which location they're purchasing for, you will need to select that card, which may not save your user much time in the end. And then if your customer has invoicing exceptions, such as only paying the invoice partially by credit card and then maybe using credits on account to pay the rest of it, this process will not work for those situations. But during your review, we'll discuss how this workflow may fit for your company. So how do I schedule my ChargeLogic annual checkup? Well, if you're on a support plan with ChargeLogic, just submit a ticket or call. Your plan covers 1 hour towards an annual checkup and no cost to you. And if there's any additional time, that will fall into your hourly rate. And if you're not on a plan, just submit a ticket or call and schedule it. And the cost is your normal hourly support rate. And we estimate that it will take about 1 hour to cover all of these points. So thanks everyone. I hope that gives you an idea of what a ChargeLogic annual checkup can do and has educated you a little bit on the world of credit cards. So Suzanne?
Yeah, and just to clarify, that is if you have an Archer Point support plan, I think noted ChargeLogic, yes, you can, that's included in your plans, or would be billed at your normal hourly rate if that's the type of plan you're on. So again, you can type your questions in the questions pane of your GoToWebinar console, or just use the raise your hand feature in the same console. I do have a couple of questions for you that have come in, Crystal.
Right.
If you could just reiterate an example of level 2 and level 3 types of information.
Okay. Yeah, so level 2 information is going to come from the header of the sales order, and you could include things like the date, the PO number. It could be sales tax information if your system collects the sales tax information in the header. Things like that are going to come from the header. The address information, anything that you would see stored on the header would be an example of level 2 information. Level 3 information would be anything that would come from the lines of the order. So that might be information identified as freight, could be duties if you charge your customer duties for some reason, or an alternative sales tax. If your taxes come from your lines versus your header, it's going to pick it up there as well. So that's kind of how they split what level 2 information is, what level 3 information is. And different cards require either or both.
Great. Another question would be the fraud alerts. Do those come from NAV or ChargeLogic?
Well, they will come from your NAV system set up via the ChargeLogic add-on, but they happen, I guess the important part of that is they happen after the authorization has gone through the gateway, your customer's card, and has come back to NAV and they said, well, this one's approved. Well, we can put that through additional fraud alerts if we want to via the ChargeLogic setups. So your user, as they're typing in their order and they send off for the authorization, they get a return, it's just really a few seconds later, of any fraud alerts from within Navision.
Great, thanks. And then I think this might be our last question. What if I'm not an Archer Point client and I want to schedule a health check, ChargeLogic health check?
Right, right. So occasionally there are VARs out there that don't have expertise in implementing ChargeLogic and they don't have that resource. and we would be glad to work with them. So if there isn't anybody on the call, just reach out to your bar, and if they don't have a qualified resource, ask them to contact us, and we'll be glad to work with them.
Great. I think that is it for our questions today. I want to thank everybody once again. Thank you, Crystal, for sharing your knowledge, and we hope you appreciate or that you found some value in this webinar. To help us to continue to offer value, we'd like to ask you to take just a few more minutes to give us your feedback and let us know what other topics you'd like us to cover in future webinars. Simply email your comments to info@archerpoint.com. Again, that's info@archerpoint.com. Thanks again, everyone. This concludes today's session. Have a great rest of your day.